Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 16th edition of the Health System Fix podcast. My name is Dr. Gaurav Mishra. I'm a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist and a health systems design expert. My goal is to talk to people who have different professional, personal experiences with the health system and who have worked on different innovative solutions. I'm excited to welcome Aaron Byzak today. Aaron is a Chief Strategist and Lead Consultant for Galvanized Strategies. He has been supporting an array of healthcare and nonprofit clients. Recently, he served for 9 months as an interim CEO of Grossmont Health District, helping the district achieve more than a dozen goals. Aaron has over 30 years of experience in healthcare management, EMS, health policy, and nonprofit leadership. He's a recognized changemaker in the region, and he's led award-winning public health and advocacy campaigns. Aaron is a 4-time Emmy Award-winning writer and producer and a dynamic public speaker. He holds an MBA in healthcare management and policy from UC Irvine and executive leadership certificates from UCLA and Cornell. Welcome, Aaron. Great to have you on.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Aaron, so can you tell us a little bit about early life and up to when you first started thinking about professional careers and education?
Yeah, I grew up in North San Diego County. I was born to parents that had very severe drug and alcohol addiction issues. And so that had a profound impact on my life and my siblings' life for the first probably 17, 18 years of our lives. And so that really sort of set the stage for what I would end up doing in my life. I was very much born a grandpa, as some people in my family would say. I was born with sort of an old man's eyes and view of the world. And I used to very clearly as a child point out the fact that some of the policies that we were following in the United States as it relates to poverty programs and whatnot were actually encouraging my family's drug addiction. And so I didn't know the words perverse incentives, but I knew the concept of what it was. And so that was sort of my life growing up. I made a decision very early to stay away from drugs and alcohol. I'm 48 and a half, and I've never had alcohol in my life. I've never done anything like that. And I just sort of saw it as an opportunity to make a clean break from sort of a familial trend. And that was sort of my life. I was always, as a kid, sort of academically inclined and capable, but didn't really have the stick-to-itiveness that you would need in order to do well in school over the long run. I would get A's on tests and never do any of my homework, just to give it, kind of an idea of it. I actually went into healthcare originally at the age of 16 just because I got a job at a pharmacy. I got a job at a pharmacy as a delivery driver. It was a little mom and pop pharmacy. And I delivered medications to elderly people who could not leave their homes and to skilled nursing facilities. But what was interesting about that was I sort of learned the plight of the small pharmacists against the big corporate entities. And I also learned what all of the medications were for. And it ended up working out really well because after high school, I went into emergency medical services. I actually went to EMT school and became an EMT originally and was already ahead of the curve when I went into the EMT world because I already knew what all the medications were for. And so I could walk in and pick up a bottle and go, oh, this person has congestive heart failure, or oh, this person has atrial fibrillation, things like that. So that's kind of where I got my start.
Going back when you were still a kid, do you have any counseling, any support at that time?
Not as much. It was funny because in about 7th grade, myself and a number of other kids started getting pulled out of class, and we were put into a sort of a group session at school. And you figured out real quick, like based on who was sitting around the room and what their stories were, that they had obviously identified us as coming from difficult families. And so we did do a little bit of that. And, what was really interesting about that was that you got to know that you weren't alone, that there was other kids that were going through this. And what's remarkable to me now as I look back on it was how quiet we kept everything. In a age, in a world where you would go out and tell everybody everything, no one said a word about the things that were said in that counseling session. Every kid kept it to themselves. And I say now that we would pass each other in the halls and we would just exchange a knowing glance, sort of like, hey, yeah, you and I are on the same page about things. So I had a little bit of counseling there, but not much beyond that.
If you were to think, what else would have helped at that time for a growing kid or teen going through something like this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was lucky enough that I had really solid grandparents, and so my grandparents served as the rock of the family and sort of the safety net for us. We would live on and off of my grandparents. My grandparents were the reason we ever had Christmas and things like that. And so I think having that was very helpful. What I would say is I had some experience when I was about 10 years old with child protective services where we were being abused, and you're sort of trained when you're a kid that's being abused to say, no, no, nobody hits me. Nobody does this, right? Things like that. And then one day I just admitted it and said, yeah, yeah, it's happening. When Child Protective Services came by to ask me questions at school, they took a bunch of pictures of wounds and stuff, and they promised me that they would get my brother and my sister and I out of the house. And I went home that night super empowered. And my mom was a drug addict, a very severe drug addict at the time. And she said, did Child Protective Services come and talk to you? I said, yeah, they did. And I told them what's been going on here, and they're getting us out of here. And let me tell you, I never saw Child Protective Services again. They never came back. And I don't know if that's an aberration or what, but the fact of the matter was, it would have been very helpful if there had been a government program that actually followed through on these things. I felt like the government programs that we were involved with actually sort of reinforced my mom's addiction for a very long time. And there was almost no accountability. And if we had simply been taken out of the house and sent over to my grandparents' house, things might have ended up being quite a bit different. So I think that would have helped.
Right. So you're working in EMS, and then I think you transitioned to working for the California State Senate.
Yeah.
Tell me about that transition and what inspired you to do that.
Yeah, that's not a natural progression, right? From EMS to state senate staffer. I had a series of events happen early in my EMS career. One was that I had to have a heart procedure when I was 22 years old. So I was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect, had to have a heart procedure, and coming out of the heart procedure, realized that I probably should not have even lived as long as I did. And I started to think to myself, maybe you're here for another reason. I always not jokingly say, is my purpose in life to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to run on another heroin overdose? Right? Like, is that what I want to do? And I was sort of struck by the reactive nature of emergency medicine. Like, you wait for something really bad to happen. And I would have preferred to be more proactive. So that was sort of the initial seed planted. My mom had gotten clean when I was about 17. And by the time I was in EMS, she was battling stage 4 cancer. And so I became a caregiver for her. And I was a caregiver for a sister who had disabilities and grandparents who were in different systems. And I just was sort of struck by the inconsistency of the different types of healthcare that you could receive in our system and the complexity of navigating the system. I also was much more cognizant and sympathetic to my patients about what the plight of the patient actually looks like, having been a patient. And I started really paying attention to my patients a lot more. And particularly elderly individuals who are sort of at risk and sort of vulnerable. And I had an affinity for my grandparents' generation a lot. And I kind of thought that we were throwing old people away in skilled nursing facilities. I was going there all the time and I was seeing patients. I'm like, wow, we don't treat people very well. And all of that sort of mixed together got me interested in law, like health law. How are health laws made? Why are these rules made that we follow? And ultimately, that led me to somebody who worked in government affairs for the ambulance agency that I worked for, a man named Eric Birch, who was one of my first mentors in the field. And he took me on a lobbying trip. And that was the first time I thought, wow, I could actually maybe do this for a living. And so soon after that, I decided to go to college while I was working on the ambulance and go get an internship. And so I started as an intern in a senator's office and eventually worked my way into a job. And I worked for 7 years in health policy.
Tell me if I'm reading this wrong or right. Back then, you're trying to describe it that there was not a lot of financial investment into preventative services. But I would say
No.
even today, the prevention portion of healthcare is really underfunded or not robust in any way. But today it's more due to short-term thinking than actually lack of funding.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting when you compare, I've been working in health policy now for 24 years. We always compare ourselves to Western European countries and the types of healthcare systems they have and things like that. And you see these charts, and the charts show per capita US spending on healthcare, and it goes down as you go to these other places. But what they don't usually show you is the reverse chart that shows how much those other countries spend on prevention services, right? So they're spending a lot more on prevention and less on the actual provision of care. And we don't do that here. And I actually sort of blame politics for this. I've done prevention work for many years now, 20 plus years. And the problem with prevention work is if you're successful doing prevention work, nothing happens. If you prevent it from happening, the impact is not there, the data is not there. And so the politicians, who are by nature highly reactive people, they're like, oh, this itches, I'll scratch it, right? If it's not itching, there's nothing to scratch. And so they say, oh, well, we'll take the money away from prevention, we'll put it into this other thing that's demanding our attention. And so you see it a lot in things like drug prevention. For many years, they were funding drug prevention initiatives to great effect, actually. Drug use was going down. And then we got to a point where we started adopting harm reduction. And harm reduction is basically like, well, we're not preventing it anymore. We're just going to try to reduce the impact. Let you get to the brink of death and we'll revive you. And maybe we'll give you a flyer to go to treatment, stuff like that. But I'm more of a primary prevention guy, like prevent it from happening to begin with. It saves you, it saves the society tons of money, tons of time, tons of heartache. It saves families. And I just don't think it's sexy enough for politicians to actually do. And so I think that they are disinclined from doing prevention programs. And I just brought up substance use. It's the case across the board with everything.
Yeah, I see even locally at on organizational level also, there is significant amount of short-term planning and thinking, which does not, because as you said, any kind of long-term planning or prevention work requires a lot of upfront effort and investment for it to then give you the results long-term.
That's right. That's right. It's actually, I think it's an affliction that impacts people, not just politicians. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues with life outcomes for people is a lack of a sense of delayed gratification. Everyone wants instant gratification. And one of the things that I think has been a sort of a secret sauce for me is my ability to delay gratification.
Yeah.
And the ability to say, you know what, I'm just going to buckle down. I'm going to do it this way. And it's not going to be balloons and freaking confetti every time I do something. But over the long run, it'll gradually work out the way that I want to work out. And that has really been the case. I teach a lot of classes in homeless shelters on life planning. And I would say the biggest affliction, and we obviously know that mental illness is a big issue in homelessness. We know that drug addiction is a big issue, but a lot of the drug addiction comes from untreated mental illness, right? And a lot of it also comes from a lack of delayed gratification. People need instant reinforcements they need instant feedback. This is why people fall into bad relationships. It's why all these things and all those things mixed together lead to negative outcomes. Homelessness just happens to be one of the more prominent ones nowadays that we can kind of point to and be like, oh, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think delayed gratification and uncertainty tolerance, I've read somewhere, can really predict just life and professional success for people who are able to do that. Because that's what really life is, that you're going to have to wait for any gratification and things may be uncertain. I feel like you're also an action-oriented person, but you also can delay gratification. Did you enjoy Senate work? Was it slow? Was it difficult? What was it like? Yeah.
It's funny. I'm an action-oriented person, but I took to health policy like there was no tomorrow. It was great. It was funny because you don't know. I meet people all the time and they tell me that they want to work in health policy. And I say, have you spent 8 hours straight reading health policy? Because if you spend 8 hours straight reading health policy and you still feel the same way, come back to me and we'll talk. I read it every day and felt completely jazzed by the whole thing. I was like, this is great. Because the thing about it was that unlike many college students who start school when they're 18 and have no idea what they want to do and their brain isn't fully developed and all these things, I knew at 24 when I started college exactly what I wanted to do. And so when I was reading health policy, I was sucking the marrow out of all of it. I was just pulling everything that I possibly could out of that experience. And I took to it and I'm sort of focused on excellence. And so I just thought, okay, well, whether you're an intern or a staff member, perform well. And so everything I did, I tried to perform well. And the more you perform well, the more they give you to do. And so I just kept on doing more and more. And Eventually, the great thing about my time at the Senate was that I had a chief of staff, another mentor of mine named Wade Teasdale, who sort of took me under his wing. And he would give me random one off projects to do, I think just to see if I could do it. And he would throw me a challenge, and I just kept saying yes. And those challenges were outside of policy. They might be an art project that was related to politics, right? Or it might be putting on an event or writing or conceptualizing something. And the great thing about that is that it took me out of a policy lane and allowed me to sort of run in multiple lanes and flex muscles I didn't even know that I had. And so that was really cool. And I think that set the stage for my career, because over my career, it's been very difficult to define me as Aaron's this or Aaron's that. No, Aaron's like a bunch of different things. And I really enjoy that because I'll probably get bored doing one thing too much. I like doing a lot of different things.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. How do you see a policy when it's created? It has to be very broad because California as a state has, a lot of constituents and it's a big state, to then implementation. And sometimes we see significant gaps in how something was designed or thought about versus how it is implemented on the ground. Can that process get better? I've been more on the receiving end of the policy so far in my kind of career, where I've worked on implementation of policy. And I think the best ones I've worked on are those which do have broad guardrails of this is what we expect you to do, but then allow a lot of creativity within those guardrails. And I don't know if you have thoughts on the creation of the policy and implementation, and sometimes we see the gap.
Oh, 100%. I think that there is too much ideology in the policy creation and not enough understanding of on the ground, tip of the spear, how does this actually implement? And so the best policies that I've seen are the ones that are informed by on the ground people who, an elected official invites people in and says, hey, I have an idea, but I want you to tear it apart. Tell me this sucks, or tell me this is good, or whatever. And let's put together something that you intentionally go through a thought experiment where you say, okay, how does this look from the perspective of this constituency group? What about that constituency group? And that might change. It might be different based on age, youth, adult, seniors. It might be different based on ethnicity or geography or all these different things. And so it's very difficult to write a policy that is actually good for a lot of different people without doing the deep dive. But most of the time, they don't do a deep dive. Most of the time, I feel very strongly that the goal is like, I need to be able to say that I'm doing something and I'm going to write a policy and we'll see if it works. Or it's based on one data point that somebody heard that happens to be sort of an interesting data point. And they're like, because of that data point, I'm going to carry this bill. And I also think that we, particularly in California, we exist in a system where, half or more of the ideas are completely and utterly unwelcome. I mean, this is a one-party state. I joke with some people that lobbying the state legislature is like lobbying the Politburo in Soviet Union circa 1974. Is like, if you're on board with the party, then you might get something through. But I worked for Republican offices even 20 something years ago when Republicans still had a little bit of, wiggle room where you could stop a tax measure from going through. You weren't the super minority. And even then, I used to joke that if we brought a bill that says, I think we should all breathe oxygen, it would be killed immediately. It's like, no, we're not breathing oxygen, not in this state, And so I think that when you take half or more of the ideas off the table from the beginning, you don't have any incentive to engage with constituencies who think differently than you, and it's not surprising when bad policy comes out of it. And I will say that that is the case on whatever side you happen to be on. There's other states that have one party rule in the other direction. That's never a good situation. You need to have checks and balances on each other, including ideological checks and balances. I would say that if I was an elected official, I would have very robust advisory committees of people. And I've been on numerous advisory committees for elected officials, and they're generally performative. It's like, well, I have all these people in the room. I want them to all nod along as I tell them what my beautiful ideas. And more often than not, people literally just nod along with it, even if it's a bad idea. I've seen people, we've sat in meetings as an advisory committee and everybody's like, that's a great idea. And then we walk out and people go, that's a terrible idea. I can't believe that they're doing this. And it's like, well, say something then. I'm a guy that says something. Always. It's sort of in my DNA to do it. And so, I'm usually the odd man out on such things.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've faced situations where I'm in a group of people who agree with me in the room, but when it's there to say it, nobody else speaks up, and I'm the only one who's
Right.
spoken up about this thing.
No, right.
And obviously, people who are speaking up too are not necessarily happy. But I tell you, there's a lot more people think similar to what I do. They just don't want to speak up.
No, I think that's exactly right. I've met a lot of people who come up to me afterwards and like, "Hey, I agree with you. Shh, don't say anything." Right? And it's like, "What are you so scared of?" But the reason why they're so scared is because there are politicians who are fond of retribution. It is the truth. There are people that will hold it against you. And so it's not an unfounded fear to be afraid to speak up and say something. And I'm not saying that that's only politicians, that's people in general. There are lots of people who will engage in full on retribution if you say something that they don't like.
I think you transitioned to Tri-City Medical Center.
Yeah, no, what happened was while I was working in politics and policy, I went to graduate school and I got an MBA in healthcare management and policy. And my goal had been from the beginning, like, okay, I'm going to leverage this EMS experience, this on the ground, down and dirty, healthcare delivery experience. And I'm going to take that insight into politics and policy. And then I'm going to learn that, and I'm going to take that insight into the business world of healthcare and ideally work in the advocacy realm for health systems and things like that. And so I was hired originally as the head of government affairs for UC San Diego Health Sciences. And so what's interesting is that I was at the age of 24, I had no formal education and I was just starting undergraduate school. And by the age of 32, I was the head of government affairs for UC San Diego Health Sciences. And I was there for almost 8 years. And I handled local, state, and federal policy issues for them and advocacy, and also community engagement, and kind of branched out and did other things and worked on marketing initiatives and communication stuff and things like that. And what was really interesting about that is that because of my philosophy on things like, okay, if I'm going to do a communications piece, even if it's a one off, I'm going to focus on making this the best communications piece anyone's ever seen. Or I need to create a poster, let's design it really well. And what ended up happening was almost every time I did something like that, I ended up winning an award. And so it just sort of got to this point where people are like, oh, you could do these other things too. And I said, well, I guess so. I mean, I did it that one time and it worked out. Give me another thing and we'll see if it worked out. And it generally worked out. And so after my time at UCSD, I became a consultant for a period of time at Galvanized, my initial run with Galvanized. And then I was hired at Tri-City Medical Center as the chief external affairs officer, and then eventually became the chief strategy officer.
And so, the I think the experience with the EMS, even for me, I did my residency in inner city Detroit. So I know the 3 a.m., 4 a.m. hospital ER evaluations I did really formed such a strong foundation of all the other experiences. So you can
Yeah.
always go back to those experiences and kind of relate to the difficulty of healthcare and patient
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very true. I mean, I will say that all throughout my career, and even when I first started college, I remember my first day at college, the professor was going over the syllabus, and the professor said, there's a 10-page paper due at the end of the semester. And all these 18-year-olds like, 10-page paper. And I'm sitting there, having worked on an ambulance for years, going, listen, there's no severed arms. you know, I'm not trying to revive a baby, right? Nobody has third-degree burns. It's a 10-page paper. It's a 5-page paper. You hit the double space key, it's 10 pages. It's okay. Don't trick yourself into thinking it's something that it's not. And so when I went through school, it was very easy. And honestly, everything I've done professionally is very easy compared to working on an ambulance.
Yeah.
The stakes are, everyone thinks the stakes are high, and whatever you're doing, the stakes are not that high. Nobody's going to die in 30 seconds if you don't do something right. And so, yeah, I fall back on that a lot. I almost, I've never been in the military, but I almost kind of relate it to people who have been in the military. And, you served in the military for a period of time and it just set the bar super high for certain things. And then after that, you're like, this is easy. I could do this. It's not a problem.
Yeah. When I first moved to California, I was in Imperial County. On my first day at the county, my team told, Doc, you have a really difficult patient coming in today. And I just remember, like 3 a.m. in Detroit, inner city ER with a psychotic and a manic patient, it's not going to get harder than that, so
No.
it's all going to be easy. I tell clinicians, make sure you get an ER training, ER rotation. Like, you need to see the high intensity piece and then everything else becomes easier to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. People always ask me, like, how do you remain so calm in these situations? I'm like, this is nothing. Don't worry about it. We're good.
So your tell us a little bit about your work at Tri-City Medical Center and like the strategy work you did there. But like so, institutional strategy now is obviously much different than a state policy level work. Right? You're much more on the ground there.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I was born at Tri-City Medical Center. So when I left UCSD, it was funny because I had a colleague of mine from UCSD call me a few days later and she goes, "Are you going to go work in a health system?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And she goes, "Why not?" I said, "I think I'm going to do consulting for a little while." And she goes, "Well, if you're going to go back to a health system, where would you go?" And without even blinking, I said, "Tri-City." And she goes, "Really? Tri-City? Like, why would you choose that?" And I said, "It's my home. I grew up in the area. I was born at the hospital. My son was born at the hospital. All my family members were largely born there. It is sort of it's a unseen in many respects organization. It's a district hospital. It's independent. It's having a hard time getting by, had challenges with the media, has this challenging reputation in the community. And I said, if I'm going to take my abilities and my talent somewhere, I want to go to a place like that where I can have a disproportionate positive impact on the organization. I love baseball. I put it in baseball terms like, I don't want to go play for the Yankees. I want to go play for like the Pirates and deliver a championship to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Something that is out of the realm of possibility. And so when I went to Tri-City, I was originally in charge of marketing, communications, government affairs, and community engagement. And I just turned that around for them. That was the first bit of it. We had lots of challenges. We shut down our behavioral health unit within a few weeks of me getting there. So within a few weeks of arriving, we had a situation that arose where we were made aware of new federal regulations that basically said that you can't have drop ceilings inside of an inpatient facility because of ligature risk, right? And our entire facility was that. And so we had to suspend operations of it. And it resulted in this huge like turmoil in the community and everybody was against us and all this stuff. And there was a lot of lies floating around the community too, a lot of political activity going on. And what was interesting was that I just kind of looked at that and I said, okay, this is a tough situation. I was there, I think, 2 weeks when that happened. And I said, okay, it's a tough situation. What's the best case scenario that we can come out with when this is all over with? I'm going to have to fight this war, right, publicly on, protect our reputation, but eventually get to the point of where something positive happens. And actually, that positive thing happened yesterday. They did the ribbon cutting for the new psychiatric health facility at Tri-City yesterday. That was the project that I worked on as a result of that. And I wrote a 40-page white paper on behavioral health reform, and I met with hundreds of different people, and I did all these speeches and all these different things. And so I'm sort of a guy who likes to take challenging situations and turn them into opportunities. And so that's what life was like at Tri-City. Life was challenging situations marked with opportunities. So we had that. We had some other negative media that was completely made up. We had COVID happen. We lost tens of millions of dollars during COVID. It was an incredible time to be a hospital leader and a healthcare leader, even though I would be what you might call second tier C-suite, because, the person who handles public affairs is not the top tier. I sort of became the top tier and became a right-hand person to a number of the key individuals and got to work on pretty much everything. And eventually there was a leadership change. The new leader asked me if I would serve as a chief strategy officer, and so I did. And our main focus was the affiliation. So we were at a point where we were going to have to affiliate. It came down to UCSD, where I had worked, or Sharp. And so I made my voice heard as to who I thought we should affiliate with. It was no uncertain terms. It was comprehensive, my analysis. It was based on a lot of experience. And my advice was universally rebuffed. And so when it was universally rebuffed, I just said, well, are you really the chief strategy officer if your advice is not taken on arguably the most important decision in the last 40 years of the organization? Not really. You're not. And so I orchestrated leaving and reopening my consulting firm. And it was a good time for me because I was at a point in my life and my career where I wanted more time with my family, wanted to work from home, wanted to kind of flex some of those entrepreneurial muscles a little bit more. and also go out and help a breadth of people that are out there, organizations on a variety of challenges.
This is something I struggle with. So you obviously do well in chaos and it's a shit show. You got it, right? How do you do when things are running smoothly?
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like when things are running smoothly. Like it's funny. I like to come in and fix things and then hand them off to somebody else to manage the normalcy. I don't want to manage normalcy. I want there to be a challenge for me to fix. There was one point where somebody had talked to me about the potential of being the chief operating officer. I have no interest in that whatsoever. I do not want to be filling the schedule for CT techs, at, midnight because two people called in sick. My jam is the world on fire? Is something wrong? Like, I'm more than willing to step in and handle things when something's wrong. The other thing I love is, and the thing I actually love more, is where there is a seed of an idea. And for whatever reason, that seed has not been allowed to germinate. I look at it and I say, let's take that seed and let's plant that in some healthy soil. And let me tend to it, and I'll water it, and I'll give it light, and I'll give it all these things, and I'll fertilize it. And eventually, it will grow into something beautiful and that we can look at and we can all marvel at, or we can harvest and use for whatever purposes we have. So that's what I like to do. I will say I do really well at home when things are homeostasis. I love that. I don't want chaos at the house. But when I go to work, I want a problem to fix. That's when I'm at my best.
Yeah, no, your seed analogy is perfect for healthcare. If patients are the seed, and you have unhealthy soil, which is poorly running systems of care, underfunded, under-nutrition, under-resourced, right, understaffed, then how is that seed going to germinate or do well? So even at San Isidro, a lot of my work was really focused on making sure, build a good system where people and clinicians and team members can thrive. And that made sure the patients were taken care of.
And this is why it's really important that your employee engagement and that your employee relations are really top notch. Because if the employees do not feel heard and they do not feel like they're part of the team and part of the family, then that will be reflected in the way they treat patients. And that is the unhealthy soil that you're referring to. And so all of it needs to be working in collaboration. And the watering is attention. You have to show attention to things. So many good ideas out there and good initiatives die from lack of attention. People talk about it and they go, oh, well, that's in the binder on the shelf. And I'm like, no, let's pull it out and let's vet it. Like, does this actually make sense? And this is something I say about arguments and ideas for projects, is that you have to rip it out of your chest and you need to hold it in front of you. And you need to look at it from all angles and say, is this actually good? Right? You remove it from your chest so you don't have any emotional connection to it. It's just like, I'm not emotionally connected to this. I want to tear this apart because I know that when it's all over with, it's going to be a superior product, and then I will have an emotional connection to it.
Yeah. I mean, but that is one of the hardest things to do for people, to take their idea and look at it objectively without looking at it as a part of them or something they did. And again, because of which oftentimes there's dissenting voices of people who can actually add to it and make it even better. That's kind of shut down by people.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's why when people talk about diversity, diversity on its face is not a strength. Diverse perspectives and experiences and capabilities unified around a common purpose is very powerful. And I haven't always been able to pull it out of my chest. I've been emotionally connected to things for many years. But as I got older and I became more patient, I just kind of said, okay, it's an idea. What you have is an idea. Ideas need to withstand scrutiny. So intentionally look for scrutiny, like on your terms. Like, hey, rip this apart and tell me it's stupid. I say that to people all the time. I'm like, hey, I wrote this thing. It's an idea. I want you to tear it to shreds and just tell me everything that's stupid about it and everything that makes your heart sing and everything that you think is amazing. And tell me what I need to cut out and what I need to add. And when you do it like that, you don't have an emotional connection to it because you're actually asking for it. It's when you say, isn't this the greatest thing you've ever seen? And they go, well, what about this? You're like, how dare you talk about my baby like that? You can't do that.
The only people you're asking is those who have to say it's great.
That's right too. When people work for me, I try to make an environment where it's like, listen, don't say that it's good just because I'm your boss. Tear it to shreds. Like, I employ you for a reason. It's because you have a particular skill set and you see things differently than I see them. Now, most of the time they don't rip it to shreds because I've put so much effort into it that I've thought through a lot of the contingencies and the other perspectives. But if I didn't do that, it would probably get torn to shreds.
Had this exercise with my team at San Isidro that they would come up with an idea, and early on, I would call it like this poking holes conversation. Because I have, once you give me an idea, and if I say yes, then I have to take it to the executives, right? So I'm going to poke holes in your idea. It's no disrespect. I'm questioning how you've thought about it. And over time, as we kept doing it, they got a lot better. They said, we had a session in which we just discussed, what is Dr. Mishra going to question? How is he going to question it? So they came with better formed idea. And I did the same to my supervisor.
Well, yeah, no, a good example of this is that I've led a lot of marketing initiatives. And so I happen to have an eye where from across the room, I could spot if something is 16th of an inch off, right, in the design. And that critical lens through which I would look at things, I would go to my staff and I'd say, okay, take me through the project. And they'd take me through and I'd say, it's a 16th of an inch off on the right side. So let's fix that. And they'd say, no, it's not. I'm like, get out the ruler, and it'd be a 16th of an inch off. And I'd say, that side is ever so slightly higher than the other side. And what it did was it got them to understand that, oh, Aaron is going to scrutinize this, not in a mean way, but he's looking for excellence. And so it set a bar for them on what they were doing to where now, well on in their careers, not working for me, that voice, Aaron's voice, remains in their head. Like, oh, is this off? I think I need to fix this, and stuff like that. And so I see what you're talking about. Like, they preemptively fix the problems that they anticipate you're going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. That lifts the team together as you're trying to do more work. Let's talk about Grossmont Health District. So you've been this interim CEO for the last 9 months. What's that experience been like?
It's been amazing, actually. It's kind of funny because I was the communications consultant for them. I was doing their media and whatnot, and they had a leadership change. The board decided not to re-up the contract of their prior CEO, and I don't think that they had sort of a succession plan fully played out. And so they had to make a decision pretty quick on who was going to sort of lead the district in the interim period. And they thought the interim period was going to be about 3 months. Now, I knew that there was no way it was going to be 3 months, and they had called somebody about it. And that person said, well, have you thought about Aaron? He's already on contract with you. And they said, oh, no, Aaron's a communications consultant. And they said, no, Aaron's done a lot more than just communications. And so they kind of took a look and they offered me the role. And my initial reaction was to say no, actually. And I came home and I talked to my wife, and my wife says, don't you do fractional executive work? And I said, yes. And I said, but I don't want to work full time. And she goes, well, then just tell them that you don't want to work full time and see what they say. And so I went back to them. I said, listen, I'll work 20 hours a week and I'll do it. And they said, okay. And so we signed the deal. And for the first 3 months, it was sort of, okay, get to know the place, figure out what's going on, see what the pain points are, get to know everybody, figure out what projects are real and imagined, what's dormant, what's not. And pretty soon I started realizing that, wow, okay, so this place is a model in a lot of ways, in a lot of what they're doing. But even in models, there's ways that you can improve operations and whatnot and policy. And it was funny because I sort of went back to the early stages of my career. And I thought, organizational policy is just as important, if not more important, than national policy because it has a hyper local impact. And you can really assess the culture of an organization, the ideas within an organization, and then, influence the development of policy. And then that impacts behavior and practice. And so I started working on things like that. And I set initially 7 goals of what I wanted to achieve. We achieved all 7 goals. They re-upped my contract to kind of give us more time to recruit a permanent CEO. And so I just kept adding projects onto my list of goals. And so I ended up with like 16 or 17 goals, and I've achieved 15 of them. And 2 of them are in process. And what I loved about the fractional role is that it allowed me to focus on the big picture items. You still have to deal with the day-to-day stuff, right? I mean, that's always going to happen. But I don't read a lot of emails. I just tell them, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to spend half my life reading emails. You pay me to get things done. If you send me an email that's really important, text me and say, hey, dude, look at this email and fix it for us. But I don't spend my days reading emails. I spend my days focused on ideas and bringing ideas to fruition and implementing them in a way that will be baked into the culture and will have long-standing impact. That's my focus now. Is like, how do you leave legacy? How do you leave in your wake initiatives that can be carried on through successive leaders after you? Because a lot of the things that I've done over the course of my career have been very successful while I was there. And then the second I leave, they just get abandoned. And that's really frustrating to me, but part of that is also me not wanting to manage stuff after it's all done. I want to build it, hand it off to some really capable manager who's used to doing that stuff.
Yeah, and very recently I've started thinking also that part of a successful leader is also when you leave, things don't fall apart. And it is not
Right.
just your sheer ability to push things through that got it there, right? You created systems.
Right.
Another question, how you think about strategy. Is it different for the CEO versus the strategy officer?
A little bit. I mean, because when you're the CEO, the buck stops there. The buck stops with you, and there is fundamentally a different relationship because the chief strategy officer reports to the CEO with a dotted line to the board, but the CEO reports to the board. I'm not a huge fan of having 5 to 7 bosses. Like it doesn't always work. And I actually like being the boss, quite honestly. I'd rather be the boss in these situations. Let's just be real. I'd rather be the boss. But I mean, the CEO has to think of strategy and they have to think of finance and they have to think of operations and everything else and the politics of things and all this stuff. And those things obviously factor into the chief strategy officer role. But it's just, it's kind of like you take the chief strategy officer role and you go one level up and a little bit broader for the CEO, and the chief strategy officer can come up with ideas and hand them off to other people to implement. The CEO is the ultimate implementer. I mean, either it's going to happen or it's not. And I relish being in that position because I'm an action-oriented dude. I have a bias towards action. And so I'm just going to go. When I do a strategy, even as a CEO, my strategy is, okay, so let me just understand this. You want me to take this hill. Okay, would you be upset if I took the mountain range that's behind it, right? And the mountain range that's behind that, any objection to me taking that one too? In the event that it was an opportunity. And so I lay it all out and I clear it and I go, okay, my goal is to not take this mountain. My goal is to take the ranges behind it, and so it's just constantly leveling up, which requires you to be focused and firing on all cylinders all the time. But luckily for me, that's sort of my default setting.
Do you consciously think about how many projects you're working on at once to be able to give this kind of focused attention or energy?
I mean, I do and I don't. So I compartmentalize really well. But I'm also sort of a systems thinker, right? So I imagine the world. So this is a little bit of my secret sauce. I imagine ideas on a whiteboard and I draw like sort of flow charts on a whiteboard in my mind. And so all of the projects are up on the whiteboard and I can just kind of shift them over in my head and shift this one a little bit later and say, oh, these two are related. I could actually kill 2 birds with 1 stone if I do this way. And so I'm usually thinking about things like that. And the other thing is that as I've gotten older, I've become a bit more patient. And so I have realized that I don't have to force it through now. I can plant a seed and just kind of step back and let the idea kind of people marinate in the idea. And in the process of marinating, other ideas come out and new perspectives and, other things happen in the world that you couldn't have anticipated. And that informs your decision. You go, oh, well, holy hell, this is not the right time to do this because of this other thing that happened. So let's just punt it for a couple of months. We'll come back to it later. And so I keep track of things on sheets, right? I keep lists of projects I'm working on and, where I'm at and stuff, but it's all largely in my head.
And it makes sense on the grander scale. So I think that I'm sure that helps as in the big picture of what you're trying to work towards.
Right. No, it does. And, it's because you have to think of it, every piece is important, but ultimately it's all the pieces fitting together that forms the image on the front of the puzzle box. And ultimately that's the image I'm trying to get to. So for me, it's like, okay, where are the corners? Here's the corners. These are the base pieces, right? Let's put all these together. Where are the light colors? Let's put the light colors together. And then we just start kind of filling it in. And if you look at every project, whether it's a single project with multiple steps or A lot of projects with one organization, if you look at it as a puzzle and you define your boundaries and your corners, and then you find things that have commonality, it starts to go together more quickly in a more logical order.
Yeah. The last couple of questions I have, what advice would you have for somebody thinking about a career in healthcare strategy? You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's the same advice I would give to anybody thinking about any career, and that is do your research. It is shocking how many people go through 4 years of school studying a subject to get into a job that they have no idea what that job actually does. And so, I wrote an article, it's on my LinkedIn, it's called The Career Funnel. And the idea is being that you start broadly and you gradually work more narrowly. And the broadly begins with research, online research, get to know what the job, if you have a job that's buried in your mind, like, oh, that sounds really cool. Let me write that down, right? Let me go online and Google search or use chat and say, tell me everything that you know about being a healthcare strategy person. And then read that. Say, okay, what kind of jobs are out there? How much does it pay? How much schooling does it take? And whether it's healthcare strategy or anything, this is what you should be doing. And you should be comparing and contrasting different types of careers that you may be interested in, because you may have certain natural inclinations that actually would align with multiple different careers that are a couple degrees of separation from each other. As you do that, then you get down and you say, okay, where are these jobs locally? From where are the jobs? Who are the people that do these jobs? Maybe I can connect with them and do an informational interview. And I highly recommend you do informational interviews. Write your questions out that you want answered ahead of time. Don't wing it. Call them, reach out to them on LinkedIn and say, I'm considering a career in this. Would you have 15 minutes to answer a few questions? If they do, great. Ask them the questions. Don't just ask them, where did you come from? Stuff like that. Ask them, what was it about this career? Did you actually plan to do this career when you started? Most will say no. Because very few people have planned, like, oh, I'm going to start here. I'm going to become a chief strategy officer for a health system. No, nobody thought like that. Not usually, right? And so what was the circuitous path you took? What were the decision points that made you choose one path over another? I usually ask, what's the best decision you made in your entire career? What's the worst thing that you've ever done in your career that totally blew everything up? Here's a hint. If they tell you something that they did that worked out really well, try to emulate that. If they tell you that they did something really stupid and it messed things up, don't do that in your career. Smart people learn from their mistakes. Brilliant people learn from other people's mistakes. And find out those things. And when you're done with that, send them an email or a letter thanking them for it and telling them what you got out of it. Now you've built your network. Your network is building because you know these people. As you start to narrow it and you go, oh, that sounds like crap. I don't want to do that anymore because that sounds boring. I want to do this other thing. Ask that person if you could shadow them, do a ride along with them kind of thing. And then if it still seems cool, try to find an internship in that. And so it's just narrowing the funnel and eventually getting to the point of where you are making a truly informed decision about where it is that you're going and why. And in particular, what you're studying and why. Because you are making a massive investment of time and energy and financial investment to study certain things. You better know when you're going into it what the hell that's going to result in when it's all said and done.
and also maybe I think if you do this later in your career, you get to take more chances, right?
Sure.
I wanted to be a doctor since I was 5. I didn't know why, but that's what I wanted to do. And today I'm doing health systems work. I got my MBA. I had never imagined I would do those things in addition to trying to be a psychiatrist some of my time. But yeah, it definitely gave me chances to take those risks and do other things.
You bring up a good point. One of those points is that young people think that they have to choose one path over another. They're like, well, I could be a doctor or I could be a healthcare administrator. It's like, you could be both. You could be a doctor first and then become a healthcare administrator. I mean, most doctors are healthcare administrators in one way or another, whether it's officially in a title or not. But, don't fall into the false dilemma of saying, I have to do this or that. I don't have to be just a policy person. I could be a communications person and a strategy person and an executive, and I could be a coach, and I could be all these things. You don't have to play baseball or football. You can play baseball and football. I mean, there's no reason why you can't. I have people that come up to me and say, well, I'd really like to be a healthcare administrator, but I'd also like to be a professional musician. I'm like, Are you under the impression that you can't play music if you're a healthcare administrator? Like, because you can, I mean, I know people who sell records who are healthcare administrators. They're like, well, I can either make good money as a hospital administrator or I could be a starving musician. You don't have to choose between the two. You could do both, and you could do both at a high level. And that's the other thing I would encourage people to do is run in multiple lanes. I think that the future is not hyper-focused specialization, but rather expert generalist, like somebody who could do a lot of different things, but at an expert level. So if you can learn how to do multiple things really well, that's where leadership potential is there. And also that keeps you open and you have the opportunity to do jobs. You're not so narrowly defined that you can't possibly fit into this job.
I think for a long time, I was under the wrong impression that I could do only one thing really well. So I was thinking, I'm being a doctor, I'm training, but I can't take care of my health also, right? And I can't do this other things
Right.
also. And then I
Yeah.
see some people who are doing everything. They're taking care of the health, they're being a good father, they're working really hard, they have a good relationship, so they're doing it all, which is possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I sort of I fell into that trap for a long time where it was like, well, I could be professionally excellent, but I don't really have time to do all the other stuff. I was like, no, you could do all of it. And I look at it, I told you before, I love baseball. I played baseball this morning before I got on the podcast. What I say is if you understand the concept of the 5-tool player in baseball, the 5-tool player being a person who can hit for average, hit for power, run fast, elite arm, and an elite defense. That's a person that could do 5 different things at an elite level. There's no reason why you can't do 5 things at an elite level. Those people become all-stars. Those people become most valuable players. Those people become Hall of Famers. I don't want to be a utility player that sits on the bench. I want to be a freaking all-star and an MVP who does these things. What I usually tell people to do is you make a list. You say, in my area, if I were to be truly impactful in the way I want to be, what are the 5 skill sets I would need to have? Now let me rank myself in those 5 areas on a scale of 1 to 10. Where 1 being, I don't know anything about this and I suck, right? 10 being, I'm absolutely elite. And you say, based on experience or temperament or, innate capability, where am I at on these? And you might be a 7 or a 5 on some of them. You may be a 2 on others. And then what you do is you create a plan for each of them. What is my plan to go from 5 to 8 to 10? What is my plan to go from 2 to 6? And then that plan, it might be education, it might be experience, it might be any number of things like that, that becomes your day-to-day activities. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do these things to become elite in these areas. And then how do I prove that I'm elite at the end of it? Right? Is it outcomes? Am I tracking metrics? Am I tracking outcomes? What am I doing? And if you think in that kind of system, it becomes very possible, very quick to do a number of things very well because you're doing it intentionally and strategically. And the great thing about that is that there's a great quote I learned in grad school: think strategically, act opportunistically. And so if you think strategically and you're developing yourself and you're constantly checking yourself, okay, is this actually good? How do I get better? Maybe I should test myself. How do I prove this? All these different things. When another opportunity that you could never have foreseen in the past, because you don't know. I mean, we don't know what's going to come up. You could meet somebody in an elevator and that person changes your life, right? If you have thought strategically and developed yourself strategically, when the opportunity presents itself, you go, okay, I can make an informed decision about this. Otherwise, you're just kind of like, oh, what am I going to do? No, that's not a good way to approach it. So,
Okay, so let's go to the last questions. What is the most exciting, and it could be different, or most challenging project you're working on today?
well, that's a good question. I've been working on a number of challenging projects. I mean, most of the most challenging projects are challenging because you have a problem that you're seeking to address, but you have to influence a variety of stakeholders to actually get behind you on something. That's usually the biggest challenge. And so you have to understand who they are, where they come from, what are the things that tickle their fancy, and you need to be able to frame your messaging in language that will resonate with them and that they can understand. And so, I would say that, I have a number of projects I'm working on right now. Some of them I can't talk about because of non-disclosure agreements, but, you have to get through a variety of layers before those things can take off and they can fly. And so that would be the biggest challenge now. And the other biggest challenge is we talked about it before, making sure that those projects have longevity and are scalable. I want to work on things that can be used as models in other places. So it's not just, oh, you did this cool thing here. It's, I want somebody across the country to look at it and say, they did something kind of cool. Could we take some of the principles of that and implement it here? And ultimately, that is the stuff that leads to true policy. You should be doing work that is, a demonstration that works in one community, maybe you replicate it in others, and you say, okay, what are the lessons we learned from this? How do we filter that up and capture it in policy and in the way we fund initiatives? And so that I would say that's the biggest challenge doing that and thinking about that and sticking to it over long term.
One thing about stakeholders, sometimes the stakeholders you're trying to get buy-in from, they themselves are representatives and they have their own stakeholders. Do you think about the layers of stakeholder engagement? Who are these people?
100%.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, I think down to, I do research on everybody's background. Where did they come from? What did they do for work? What is their personality type? What's their education level? What is the language that they use when they speak on other projects that they're excited about? How do I use that same language back to them, in a way that is honest, that shows them that I'm listening, that frames it in a way that makes it palatable to them. I want it to land on their ear in a way to where they don't have an immediate revulsion to it. Now, I don't always succeed at that because I'm a pretty plain speaking dude and I say things that piss people off. I will say that. Also, one of my extreme capabilities is the ability to piss people off, right? And to say things that are unpopular. I work on it though. I'm working on it over time. You're on a board with me, yeah. I kind of like I wait for the moment. I go,
I also relate to, I think sometimes you just have to say the unpopular thing because nobody else is willing to. And I think that's not necessarily always wrong.
No, that's right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I do absolutely think of their stakeholders and the layers of people, even the people who influence them. Who are the people that are in this person's ear? You know, if I were to convey it to them, how are they then going to convey my idea to somebody else? That's the thing that's always scary to me is when I give somebody an idea and they take it to somebody else and they give this weird Frankenstein version of my idea. I'd rather say it myself, but I have to put it into terms, and I usually put it in writing now. I put everything in writing. So you can't misconstrue this. This is exactly what I meant by it.
You have to get them ready to sell your idea. Right? And this is so interesting and fun to talk to you about this. And your journey, obviously remarkable, and the work you're doing is definitely inspiring. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye.